hope this is a time where you feel God's presence permeating every fiber of your soul, every fiber of your being. With that in mind, I wanted to share a couple of announcements. There's VBS signups for volunteers, and then also there'll be an email coming out with a link to sign up for VBS. It's July 15th to 19th for your kids. And the 50th kid that signs up, they'll get a family 4-pack of movie passes to the theater media. And I also wanted to just recognize there's a number of athletes that are going to state that are part of our congregation. And so if you're going to state in this coming week, I'd ask you to state. And then also on the back of your bulletin, you'll see there's an introduction to our summer youth intern. It's Travis Thayer. He grew up in our congregation, and he'll be leading the youth this summer and their mission mania and everything that they do, trying to continue to build upon what Stephanie has done for our community. So please join me in prayer. God, let us seek the gift of silence, the gift of solitude, the gift of community, and everything that you pour out unto us. Like us to see everything that we touch as a prayer to you. For the sky is our prayer, the birds are our prayers, the winds and the trees are our prayers. To see you in everything that we do. In your holy name we pray. Amen. Please rise as we sing the hymn, All Creatures Love Our God and Cry King, and we'll be singing verses 1, 4, and 7. And your hymnal number 62 are the words of our scripture. Stephanie is seeking to be ordained as a pastor maybe one day, maybe be a chaplain in a church. But the first step of her journey is awesome. And May 29th, and that's what I have in my hand, she will be a licensed local pastor at the United Methodist Church. And so, this is the pastoral certificate from our conference, from the Great Plains Conference that we had at this church. And so here you go.
I wondered where that was.
And now I'd like to invite Gary. Must have known Gary. Gary is the chair of our board here, so we'd like to have church.
something to commemorate our thanks and appreciation for her 14.5 years of service, not just a member, a fellow congregant here in the church, but as her leadership position, service position, particularly to our youth. So Lindsay Vandevelde is our youth representative on the board. I don't know if you knew that. She does a wonderful job. She's very, very reliable and does her homework and comes prepared. So we asked Lindsay if she would sort of reach out to some of the youth and create the inscription on this plaque that says, "We're presenting to Stephanie Seth from the Silver Lake United Methodist Church, May of 2019. So Lindsay, if you would, please.
So it says, "Your ministry has made a difference in our church and the lives of our youth. The faith and kindness you have shared has been a blessing to all. Thank you."
Kyra, would you come forward? And then if Logan, Cheyenne, and Kennedy can also come up.
Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this short and sweet because I'll probably start crying. So I've known Stephanie for a long time, as long as she's been a member here. I've worked with her through lots of different challenges, and it's been amazing. It's just been amazing to watch the growth that I've seen in her through the years in the ministry. And I just feel like God has really led her this way. I know that she questioned him a lot, but this is her path. And I am so excited and so proud of her. And the whole congregation and this community just, really admire everything you've done for us. We're going to miss you. We're going to miss you a lot. But we're very excited for your future. We got a collection, monetary gift for Stephanie. There's a couple cards in here, but we wanted to present that to you.
So if you've seen me give a speech at church before, I'm probably going to cry. Stephanie's probably going to cry. It's going to be fun. I have been wrapping around like what to talk about in this speech, and I thought about the time she left me at Dylan's, or when she forgets my drink through McDonald's line, or even when my mom met Michael Tate, which is a Christian singer, and instead of taking a picture, Stephanie closed out of the camera, and then he had to go perform. So that's a good memory. There's a lot of fun memories with Stephanie, but really what stands out to me about her is her leadership, obviously, and then her friendship after being my leader. Whenever stuff went wrong for me in high school, Stephanie was definitely the person I turned to. So, like, when my dad passed away, the first person I texted, other than immediate family, was Stephanie, and literally in, like, 5 minutes, she was at my house, and that whole week, she would come to my house, and I was so annoyed in the moment. I was like, leave me alone. Like, I don't want to talk about it, but looking back now, it was so helpful, and I always know, like, I can turn to Stephanie about that, or really anything. Like I said, I kind of used to text her and ask her to pray for me, but now I just know, like, if you see my Facebook, I think she's my #1 fan right now, my mom. I can post anything, and she'll turn it into, I'm praying for you because of this, and I really appreciate it. It gets a little repetitive in my comments, but it's nice to know that she's always thinking of me, even if I don't reach out to her, so.
What started as weekly lessons with themes and catchy music has now turned into hour-long phone calls catching up on the craziness of our ministries, families, and lives. The day that I moved to Genie to embark on my ministry journey, Stephanie sat me down in this front pew at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning. All the lights were off, the sun was shining through the window, and she sat me down and told me to take one last look at this sanctuary. The pulpit, the window, the altar, the orange carpet. And she said to me, this is the place that built you. It'll always be a part of who you are. And so now, Stephanie, look at this sanctuary. The pulpit, the window, the altar, the orange carpet, and the room full of people that love you. This is the place that built you. It'll always be a part of who you are. I knew you would spread your tears.
My voice is, I'm losing it. When I was asked to give a speech for Symphony and being in youth group with her, I instantly agreed because I knew if I had the chance to express what an awesome person Stephanie is, that I would do it. Stephanie and I met in the summer before 7th grade when I showed up to Mission Mania. I was very excited but unsure of myself as I hadn't really come to church here before. She made sure that each and every one of us felt welcome and included, that we were all helpful and important to the work that we were doing that day, and she's the main reason I probably came back. I've gone on 5 mission trips with Stephanie. These are and will always be some of my favorite my memories during junior high and high school years. I think my favorite trip with Stephanie was when we went to New Mexico. We went in not expecting too much, except that we would be doing our usual work of hanging sheetrock all day, but we ended up leaving with a stronger sense of what God expects from us, each and every one of us. From authentic Native American foods, getting the van stuck in the mud, crazy dance battles to haunted churches, there was never a dull moment. Every day brought a new adventure and crazy memories. Stephanie is so amazing on these trips, because even though we're all tired, including herself, she never fails to teach us how to be good Christians and just good people in general. I've learned so much about God and just how to handle life from her. She's taught me that He is always forgiving, always with you no matter what, and loves us endlessly. Stephanie is always ready to listen to you if you need her advice or just need someone to rant to, and she's the first one to help you in any way that she possibly can. As our youth director, Stephanie is big on getting the youth involved and being the hands and feet of Christ. She pushes us out of our comfort zones and to get involved, to be accepting and helpful to all God's children, especially those less fortunate than us. As she leaves us to pursue God's plan for her, I know that she will be able to handle anything thrown at her. She is the strongest and most resilient person that I've ever known. It will be sad not seeing her here all the time, but I know she's ready to explore this new chapter in her life. I'm extremely excited for her, and I know she will be great at her new job. I can still say so much more and I respect her, but these are some of the most important aspects of who Stephanie is.
Let's give God a big clap of praise for Stephanie. Will you please stand as we continue to worship by singing Joyful, Joyful, we adore you.
Sin and sadness.
grace and God glory. Come be known to us as we're gathering together. Come be present in the songs we sing and in the prayers we raise. From the busy highways of life, we come to find once again you are always present and always ready to receive us. Deepen the roots of our commitment, that we may learn your calling upon our lives. Surround us now with the love and comfort of your Holy Spirit. Lead us and guide us to wholeness with you and each other. Amen. And now I invite you to pass the peace with one another, and that will just come forward.
Like doing fun stuff? Yeah, I bet. In junior high, you don't have like a science final? Oh my goodness, that's too easy.
Congratulations! Today is your day. You're off to great places. You're off and away. You have brains in your head, you have feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself any direction that you choose. You are on your own, and you know what you know. And you are the guy or girl who decides where you go. You'll look up and down streets, look them over with care. About some you will say, I don't choose to go there. With your head full of brains and your shoes full of feet, you're too smart to go down any not-so-good streets. And you may not find any you'll want to go down. In that case, of course, you'll head straight out of town. It is open there in the wide open air. Out there, things can happen, and frequently do, to people as brainy and footsie as you. And when things start to happen, don't worry, don't stew. Just go right along, they'll start happening too. Oh, the places you will go. And then those of you that have read the story knows that it talks about we go through good times, we go through not so good times. Sometimes we go down paths that we're just not sure. And today, boys and girls, we celebrate graduates today, that they have finished. They are, just imagine what it's like when you guys are done with school. Are you excited about that? got to see them be the hands and the feet of Christ, and to go and to help people serve and feed people in homeless shelters, pick up trash, and paint, and help with AD, and sing, and do all those things. And today we celebrate that, right? Well, today is also a day for me to celebrate, because I'm going places too. And today's my last day with all of you. And today I just want you to know how much I love you and how much I've appreciated you, big kids as well as little kids, and what a journey it's been. And that this book reminds me that you are going to go places and you don't even know you want to go. You're going to go places where you say one day, I don't really want to go there. And God's going to knock on your door and say, yes, I want you to go here. And you can put it off, and you can pretend you don't hear that knock, and you can pretend that that's not the way you're going to go. But one lesson I leave with all of you, big and little, is that God goes with us wherever we go. And when God leads our life, one lesson I had to learn here, a really, really hard lesson, is guess what? I am not in control. I am not in control of my, I said it, I'll say it one more time. I am not in control of my life. So graduates, as you leave here today, thank you for the work and the mission and the outreach and the love and the grace you show to all people, not just here in Silver Lake, not just in this community, but to where you went around the world. And I know I've taken you to places where you looked at me like, what have you got us into? And there were times that I had to hide that I didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but we did it, right? We went up those mountains, we climbed those mountains, we helped people, we did things that we didn't think we wanted to do, we did evangelism in ways that weren't comfortable to us, and God opened doors that we never knew were possible. And I stand here today as a testament that God is going to continue to do those things in your life. Maybe it won't be a pastor, maybe it will, but whatever you do in life, know that you have the grace of God that shines with you. And go forth and share that gift with all people. We live in a world where everyone wants to be doom and gloom. Everyone wants to look at all the bad things in this world. But you all are the shining light. And we need more of you to add your light to this congregation and to our world, to make this world a better place. Okay? Can you do that? Okay, that's my last charge to all of you. So the last thing I'm ever going to tell you what to do. You don't even have to get in the car with me and go and not shower for 3 days. Right? Boys and girls, can you do me a favor and can we tell our graduates, thank you for being my mentor. Do you know what a mentor is? Someone that we look up to. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Thank you for being my mentor. All right, let's pray. Gracious God, I give you thanks for this church, these children, and these youth. Of the places we will go, only God that you know. Thank you for the life that's happened here. Thank you for the laughter. Thank you for the tears. Be with our graduates as they move on to new beginnings. Be with our children as they too have no idea the exploration that's going to take place in their life. It is a good place to be at Silver Lake United Methodist Church. And I thank you, God, who has made me as a person, a youth director, and soon as a pastor. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. One more thing I would like to add that Pastor August gave me an idea. So, since I'm leaving today, I'm going to pass this around. You don't have to put long messages in it if you don't want to, but if you can put your name in it, just so as I leave here, I have Silver Lake United Methodist Church in one of the places that I will go. Today's scripture comes from Romans 12, verses 1 through 2. Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His will, pleasing and perfect will. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Amen. Please join in hymn 63, Blessed Be the Name.
Please join me in prayer. God, we ask for you to speak to us, to be a place where we can experience your full and abundant presence in our life. Amen. And so I was going to bring an hourglass up here so you guys could time me, but I decided not to because I know last week ran a little long. So it's going to be much shorter, and I don't have an hourglass. Maybe Jackson can signal me. But I wanted to start with a question. Have you ever asked God this question? What is my purpose? God, what are you calling me to do? I know that I've asked that question many times, and often when I do it, I feel myself hunched over, saying, God, what is your purpose? Other times I stay awake at night, lying in bed and just wrestling with, God, what is your purpose for my life? What is my purpose for today? What is my purpose for tomorrow? What is my purpose for the next week, the next year? I long and I yearn to know what is God's purpose for my life. And so in those times, as I find myself wrestling with trying to find what God's purpose is in my life, I sit down, sometimes lie down, but I just think, I'm like, this is my prayer. God, send me. God, lead me. Here I am. Here I am. Give me purpose and meaning. What is your will, God? And then I say, make it clear, right? Like write it on the wall, send me a sign so I know, so I don't have to guess, because oftentimes it can be unknown and you're just like, okay, God, what is your will? And make it clear to me. I don't know if that happens to you all when you pray. Do you often pray, God, what is my purpose here on earth? It's a question that I ask myself repeatedly. And when I was preparing for the sermon, it brought me back to after I graduated from college. I graduated from K-State, and I was applying to graduate school. I was applying to get my master's of business administration. And I kept on wondering, I goofed around a lot in college. So I was wondering, is my GPA good enough to get in? What is my purpose? I knew my purpose wasn't what the degree said it was. The degree I got was a hobby that I really liked. I got my undergraduate degree in history. But what is my purpose? What are you calling me to do, God? What can I use my gifts and talents for to better serve you in this world? What do you want me to do? What is my purpose? Has anybody here had those conversations with friends or family before? Maybe it's mostly like an internal dialogue that you kind of go through in your head over and over and over again. What is my will, God? What is my purpose? I'm pretty safe to say, we've all wrestled with these questions, everyone in this room. What is God's purpose for my life? But we often wrestle with this question even greater when we're in a period of transition. So what is your purpose of this transition, God? How can I live into your will during this time of change, during this time of the unknown? And so last week we talked about what a transition is. We defined a transition as how everyone is go through it, and we go through one phase of life into another phase, and that we often find ourselves stuck in transition. And so we often find ourselves when we're stuck, that's what we're wrestling with, is this question of what is my purpose? And I wanted to tell you here today that it is okay to be stuck and wrestling in that time, wrestling with finding out what your purpose is. Because I think it's in that being stuck where God teaches us, molds us, and shapes us to who God is calling us to be. He's creating this call, this transformative moment in our lives where we can live into His calling for it. But this week, I want to focus on, if we defined transition last week, I want to focus on the process of transition this week. And so researchers have said there's actually a process of a transition, and it's a transition life cycle. I have a slide for it on the computer. And so it's a generic snapshot of what a transition might look like in the phases that you go into during a transition. And so phase 1 is the entry phase, and it starts in the upper right-hand corner. And this is when you realize that things are changing, that you realize you're going through a transition. Sometimes at the beginning of a transition, there is confusion, there are questions, there are the unknown, a conflict or struggle exists, and you're not sure how to often make sense of it. That is why the entry to a transition is important in being able to recognize when you're going into it. Otherwise, we won't know that we're going through a transition. We'll wonder why conflict and struggle is going on. And we often don't get, if we fail to realize we're in a transition, the learnings and teachings and how we are being molded and shaped by the transition. And then the next phase of transition is in the bottom right-hand quadrant, and it's the evaluation phase. And it's once you enter into this transitional phase, it's a period of time where you begin to evaluate the transition that you're going through. So in that conflict, you struggle with those questions, wrestle with them in your head. How can I learn and grow through this transition period in my life? What lessons might God be teaching me through this transition? But I also want to acknowledge that during this phase, when you're evaluating yourself and where God might be, that's a lot of hard work. And so you can go from the evaluation phase back into the entry phase as you continue to wrestle with those questions. But be willing to do the hard work. Don't short-circuit a transition, because God is shaping and molding you during these times. The next phase of a transition is the alignment phase, and this is one of my favorite parts of a transition, because it is in this phase of a transition that we fully align ourselves with God's will for our lives. We fully surrender ourselves, our talents, our gifts, our abilities to God's will, to God's purpose, to build God's kingdom here on earth. It is also the moment when we're most pliable, the most moldable. As we surrender our will looks exactly like God's will, or begins to take on God's will. We're the most pliable, where we can be shaped and molded and transformed. And we often come out of the other part of this transition a new person with new outsets, with new insights into the world, new places where God can lead and guide us. We also realize our need for repentance and forgiveness. We realize our need to realign with God when we realize that God's grace is so much bigger than anything that we could imagine during this phase, the alignment phase. And then the alignment phase, you can see, leads us to the phase of direction, which is in the upper left-hand quadrant. And this is where we come through this transitional period of our life, and we see a new pathway, a new path going out in front of us, a new possibility. And our moment of breakthrough, our moment of clarity into who God is calling us to be, who God created us to be, is abundantly present to us. And we forge ahead and live into that calling. In every transition, we have that capability to live more and more into who God is calling us to be. And then finally, it all culminates, the transition life cycle, in this faith challenge. And no, it's not like an obstacle course that you have to run through, and at the end you go, yes, I made it. But we have a direction, we have a vision, but ultimately we have to make the decision to live into them. And so that's the faith challenge is we have this direction, we have this vision from God, and now we actually have to live into it. It can't just be in our head and in our mind. It actually takes movement of our body to live into it how we interact with the world, the community, your neighbors, your friends. You have to live into it. It is located at the top of the circle, I think, for a reason. So what are you doing with the transition that you're walking through right now? Let me ask you this question. At what point in this process do you see yourselves here today? What are you walking through? What are you experiencing? What is God saying to you in this moment? The challenge for us as humans is to know that God is not in a hurry to move you through a transition. We might be in a hurry. I know I'm often in a hurry, but God is not in a hurry to move you through a transition. You might say, God, just get me through this. If I could just get through this. God is not in a hurry. And I'm thankful for that. Especially in the transitions that I look back, if I would have hurried, I could see where I might have meandered, or I might have not chosen the right thing, or if I hurried, I might have missed out an opportunity. I wouldn't be shaped and molded how God was molding me today. The hard transitions, the challenging ones that I've gone through, but also the ones that you can kindly seamlessly go through, don't try to rush them. Transitions can be painful. They can hurt. You can grieve in transitions. When you look back and you see this is where I've been and this is where I'm going. C.S. Lewis talked about transition periods of our lives being a time where we awaken ourselves to God. And I love that. In a faith challenge, at the end, you're awakening yourself to God. And C.S. Lewis spoke to this awakening in a quote that he said, and the words will be up on the screen. We may ignore, but we can nowhere evade the presence of God. The world is crowded with God. God walks everywhere incognito, and the incognito is not always hard to penetrate. The real labor is to remember, to attend, in fact, to come awake. Still more, to remain awake. The bottom line of this is that a transition, it should awaken us. Awaken us to the possibilities that God is creating for us. The Apostle Paul, which we read today, was someone that was often found himself in transitional periods of his life. He was always going from one place to another, whether physically or also just spiritually, mentally. So he was stuck on the road. He was stuck in arguments with religious leaders. He was often stuck in prison. So Paul writes from this place of being stuck in a transition as he writes this letter to the Romans. Paul says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." So Paul here is saying that our purpose is to both live our faith and think our faith. In other words, Paul is saying to live, he says, offer your body as a living sacrifice. Go and live. Go and pursue the things that give you life and passion. And let that be the testament to how God is moving through your life. And then he says, go and think your faith by saying, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He says, allow for the renewing of your mind and the transformation of it. Paul says to live your faith and think your faith. Live in a period of transition and then also wrestle and think as you are being shaped, molded, and taught. So what does that mean exactly? What's a practical point of this? And so this is the kind of the questions that we discern as we go through a transition. And as I was pondering this, I was thinking, what does this look like for me in my life? Like if you had to boil it down to one simple fact. And for me, it means following Jesus. To follow Jesus wherever he is leading me, to follow Jesus wherever he is leading us as we go through a transition, to follow the new insights, directions, and visions Jesus is moving us all to. This brought me back to the greatest commandment that Jesus has, that he gives to his disciples and he gives to us today. and that is to love God and to love our neighbors, to love God and love the person that is sitting next to you in the pew, to love God and to love the person that is walking down the side of the road, to love God and to love the person that is stuck on the side of the road, to love all of God's creation. And even in the most difficult and frustrating transitions, that is our purpose, to realign with God, to love God and to love our neighbor. So here is some advice I landed on that I say I'm giving it to you, but I'm also giving it to myself. Because I know as God was speaking to me as I prepared, I was like, wow, I need to hear that just as much as I believe you all need to hear that. And that happens every single week. I'm like, wow. Who's this message for, God? Who is it for? Because I need to hear these things too. We need to live into transformation. We need to live into transition. Live into it and think into it. Don't force the end of transition. Embrace it. Learn and grow from them. And one of the ways, as I was pondering this, one of my friend's dads came to mind, and his name was Dave. And Dave retired, and he was wondering, like, what are you calling me to do, God? And so Dave and I, we would golf together. We would get in these great, deep conversations over coffee, and it's something that we just wrestled with together. Like, God, what are you calling me to do in this next chapter of my life? He wanted to know. He felt a void as he left his successful career and went into retirement. And what Dave did as he created this something new with God, he created a whole ministry for those that were going in from retirement to the next stage in life. And so he began to pour into people that would be retiring in a couple years. And his ministry began to take shape as God continued to shape and mold and lead and teach him. He began to write books about people who are retiring and how they can live into their calling more fruitfully after they retired to serve God. And I think that's what God is doing as we struggle with what the next step or what the next transition is in life, is that God is continually shaping and molding and leading us and teaching us. And the possibilities are absolutely endless. We might think that we have an imagination, but that's just a small fragment of what God's imagination is for what we can do in this world. We can do things that are greater than we could ever imagine. So what is our purpose? What is God teaching us as we go through transitions? And as I told Dave, I said, Dave, you are in the perfect place as he was navigating this transition. And we're not. Why? Because you have seen it. You have lived through transitions before, and you have surrendered to God already once. So you'll surrender to God in this transition too, and continue to be shaped and mold and teach and lead, but also you'll be able to coach people who are going through this transition so they can live into how God is shaping and molding their lives. And so as I begin to close, I wonder how many of you are in a time of transition? Better yet, how many of you are in a time of transition and don't know what the future holds? And I think Paul speaks to this. Paul says to keep living your faith. Keep thinking your faith. Don't be in a hurry to rush through that transition. Allow God to use that transition to prepare you for what is next. Timothy Paul Jones said, awake my soul. After the kind of shows this as someone, as my friend Dave, and then each of you can live into, as you start to live into God's calling in your life, it was as though someone gave me permission to do what I most wanted to do. I felt something deep inside of me relax and say yes. I felt something deep inside of me relax and say yes. There was no audible voice, nothing dramatic, save the starry sky. But some deep part of me knew what I was all about. We have the chance to learn that through transitions, the transitions we face in life, we can create a time to reflect on them reflect on the transition so we can grow and learn. Whatever transition you find yourself in, to take that time. It is in that time that we reflect and we do the hard work. And that's when God begins to shape, mold, and teach you. So I want to encourage you to continue to listen for God's voice. I want to encourage you to be still. I want you to be able to sense and know that God is with you. And remain awake to God's presence in your life. Please join me in prayer. God, we give you thanks for the transitions in life. We give you thanks on how we go and are most pliable so that we can surrender ourselves to God, your will. We ask that you give us the courage, strength, and the boldness to live into your will, not just in our mind and in our thoughts, but in our actions. And so now the ushers will begin to pass the attendance notebooks throughout the sanctuary, and I invite you to write down your name, but also there's prayer request cards in the pew in front of you, or underneath your seat if you're in the front row. And I invite you, if you want us to be in prayer for you as a community, to put those in the offering, or the offering plate when it comes by in a second. Let's continue worship by singing, Here I Am, Lord.
Before you, O God, we offer our prayers, our presence, our gifts, and our service. We lay our gifts before you in praise and thanksgiving for your many blessings. May these offerings continue to transform your work of your Spirit in and through our congregation. Amen.
And as we go to a time of prayer, I invite you to look at the back of your bulletin where all the prayer requests of the communities are, and kind of these people, families in your prayers as we sing Sweet, Sweet Spirit. Amen. Please join me in prayer. God, we give you thanks for this day, for this time of celebration, as all those amongst us that are graduating are celebrating each other. We celebrate them with you. We lift them up on the journeys ahead. We ask for your presence to guide and lead them as they move forward into a new part of life. We pray for their parents and all those that have shaped and molded them to continue to create spaces where they can grow, create spaces where they nourish them, and to be a sign of your presence with them. Lord, we lift up Rossville United Methodist Church and the family of Jack Dutton, who was the pastor there after he passed away May 15th. We pray for LeVay and his family. We ask for your comfort to surround, comfort, and embrace them. Lord, we pray for our leaders in the community and those that are leading the ceremonies. May you guide and lead them to continue to transform lives. Lord, we pause in this moment to offer up our own prayers now. God, we thank you for your grace this past week where we have missed the mark. We are grateful. And now we continue to pray in the way that Jesus taught his disciples by saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. And so now we come to the time of service where Stephanie will take over.
At this time, I invite the high school and college graduates to please come forward. And while you're doing so, if you'll take a look at the Silver Lake UNC graduate list. And the following people stand up: Jaden Falk, Xander Seth, and Dylan Vanderbilt. We recognize them as getting promoted from 8th grade going into high school, and I promise them I would not embarrass them today. I did not promise all of you. All right, so what I want you to do is I want you to go down the line. I want you to say your name. Is this all college too, at the end of college? Go down, tell your name, what you're graduating from, some of you know college, and then your plans for next year. Okay?
I'm Caleb Katz, graduating from Silver Lake, and I plan to attend Kansas State University next year.
I'm Tara Bledsoe. I'm graduating from K-State with my bachelor's in family studies and human services with a major in communication sciences and disorders. Minor as well, but we'll just cut it short. And I'm going to attend grad school at K-State as well in the fall.
I'm Brooke Lindstrom, and I'm graduating from Silver Lake High School, and I'm going to attend Kansas State University.
I'm Jake Lindstrom. I'm graduating from Silver Lake, and I'm going to K-State next year.
I'm Kennedy Katz. I'm graduating from Silver Lake and I'm going to K-State next year.
I'm Adam Kinch, graduating from Topeka High School, and I plan to go to Washington Tech.
Congregation, what I want you to know about everyone that stands here, I know all of you, right? Every single one of you, have been a huge part of this congregation. They have been the hands and feet. Adam did the AV here for years, right, for free. And this, everyone else here too, has, when there's been something, when a neighbor calls here in town and says, I need some youth, who can I send? This group here, every single one of them, I can affirm, has said, I'll go and I'll do it, not just as a youth group, but individually. So whether they're here every Sunday in church or not, they are the hands and feet, and they are out in the world and they are serving. Thank you for all that you've done as youth, and I'm excited for you as you continue in the future. May you continue that. May you continue the one lesson I always told you, that no matter what, yes, the Bible story is all about great. Those are important too. Remember that God goes with you, God walks with you, and you are never times, the dark days, the happy days, that you are never alone. That you never forget that. And as you look at this congregation and you see all these people who are smiling at you right now, know that they walk with you. That this is your home church. No matter where you go, this will always be your home. And go forth and go out in the world, but come back and see us too. Even though I'm not going to be here, I'm going to see you in the world. Come back and remember, this is your home. Okay? God goes with you. And Pastor Alex has some gifts he'd like to present. I'm going to let him share.
Okay, but I wanted to point out that
Yes.
Caleb, Brooke, Jace, Kennedy all received their scholarship at the scholarship rate at the Silver Lake. So today, I wanted to give the scholarship on behalf of the Scholarship Committee of Silver Lake United Methodist Church and its whole congregation. And then, as kind of a parting gift from the congregation, we have these coffee mugs that Jenny Miller made. And so it's a coffee mug. There's a gift for one night. There's a gift for some more caffeine in there too. But also, it's just a kind of shower tag that you can put in your shower. And it says, Lord, as I enter the water today, I remember my baptism. Wash me by your grace. Fill me with your spirit. Renew my soul. I pray that I might live as your child today and honor you in all that I do. And so it's just a gift to say we appreciate you. We are with you in any way we care to support you with you.
Congregation, as he hands those out, if you'll please turn into your bulletins for the recognition of graduates, there's a prayer for graduates. And let us all pray together. God of wisdom and knowledge, thank you for the gifts and abilities of each of the graduates gathered here today. Bless these graduates as they move on to life's next big adventure. We thank you for those who taught and worked beside them and all who supported them along the way. Walk with these graduates as they lead and move forward in life. Take away their anxiety, confusion, or purpose. Strengthen their many talents and skills. Instill in them confidence in future leaders with you, where energies may be gathered up and used for the good of all people, for the sake of Jesus Christ. Amen. And before you go, I am going to invite you to leave a little early so you can take pictures of friends when I take pictures of the kids. Congratulations.
Will you please rise as we continue to worship God and with you?
to you the last time you have to hear me talk and talk and talk. It has been an amazing 14 years, 7 years, 3 gone, 7 back. It's been amazing. And though I'm feeling a little heartbroken and a little sad, I am so excited. And I want you to celebrate the fact that you raised me up in this church from a 20-something-year-old youth director that had no clue what she was doing to very, very soon a pastor. It is because of each and every one of you. Thank you for allowing me to be by your bedside when you were sick. Thank you for letting me be in those tender moments of when someone you love passed away, or even sitting by the bedside as someone passed away that you know and love. Thank you for loving my family as we celebrated baptisms in this family of my children and heartbreak when I went through pregnancy loss. Thank you for being you. But take that spirit, and as I told those youth, if you take nothing else from me, take that there is a God that loves you beyond all understanding. And there is a world that needs to see your light shine. Be that positive force in this world. Show that positive energy, and let the light of Christ shine with each of you. And may the peace of Christ be with each and every one of you until we meet again. I love you.